8:45 in the morning, the Philippine Sea. A lone Chinese J-15 fighter was already screaming across the water at 600 knots. This was not a routine intercept. The aircraft was flying a direct suicide profile toward the flight deck of a USS Vinson. The question that would later haunt the Pentagon was not how the fighter got there, but why the pilot chose to stay on his path until the very last second. Music. The morning sun was low. It cast long and sharp shadows across the 4.5 acres of sovereign American territory, known, music, as the flight deck. Usually the air here smelled of jet fuel and salt. Today it felt like ozone and static. The carrier was conducting standard flight operations in international waters. No one expected a single engine roar to tear through the peace of the morning with such violent intent. Music. Inside the Combat Information Center of the carrier, the atmosphere shifted from professional to lethal in 3 seconds. Vampire! Vampire! A technician called out. The watch officer stared at the glass display. A bright yellow icon was moving too fast. It was already inside the inner defensive ring. The specialist reported the data. Target is a J-15. Bearing 090, speed 600 knots. Altitude 50 feet. The watch officer gripped the edge of his metal console. Do we have a lock? The weapons controller responded immediately. Veiling systems are in auto track. Sea Sparrow is armed. We are awaiting your command. Inside the cockpit of the J-15, the world was a blur of blue and music gray. The pilot was a veteran with 200 hours in type. He did not look at his instruments. His eyes were fixed on the massive gray shape of the American carrier. It was growing larger by the millisecond. His hand was steady on the flight stick. The cockpit was filled with the frantic chirping of his own radar warning receiver. He knew he was being painted by every fire control radar in the strike group. He did not deviate. He was a professional. He was executing a maneuver that had no margin for error. On the flight deck of the Vinson, a sailor in a yellow shirt looked up. He saw a speck of silver against the horizon. It grew into a shape. Then it grew into a monster. The roar reached the ship before the plane did. It was a physical wall of sound that vibrated the steel plates beneath his boots. The admiral stood on the flag bridge. He watched through binoculars. His rules of engagement were clear. He had the right to defend his ship, but he also knew that firing first could trigger a theater-wide music conflict that neither nation truly wanted. He had seconds to decide if this was a test of nerves or the first shot of a world war. The weapons controller's finger hovered over the release. The automated close-in weapon system, known as the phalanx, began its mechanical war. The multi-barreled gun tracked the fighter with robotic precision. One press of a button would fill the air with thousands of tungsten rounds. The J-15 was now 500 m away, then 400. The pilot could see the individual sailors on the deck. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 8:47 in the morning, the Combat Information Center. The air inside the Combat Information Center was freezing. The cooling systems were designed to protect the massive servers, not the comfort of the sailors. The blue light from the consoles reflected off the sweat on the face of the tactical action officer. He was a commander with 15 years of experience. He had never seen a profile like this. The commander grabbed the radio handset. Airborne contact at bearing 090. This is United States Navy warship. Music on international frequency. You are approaching a carrier strike group in an unsafe manner. Alter your course, music, immediately, or you will be subject to defensive measures. There was no response, only the hiss of static on the screen. The yellow icon was moving at nearly 1,100 foot pace. The J-15 was flying so low that it was nearly invisible to the long-range radars of the destroyers. It was using the curvature of the Earth and the spray of the waves to hide. But the Vinson was now looking directly down at it. "He is not flinching, sir," the radar operator said. His voice was 2 octaves higher than usual. "Range is now 2,000 m. Music. He is within the engagement envelope of every weapon we have." The commander looked at the admiral on the video feed. The admiral was silent. This was the most dangerous game in the world. If the American ship fired and destroyed a Chinese jet in international airspace, it was an act of war. If they did not fire and the jet crashed into the flight deck, thousands of lives were at risk. 2 miles away inside the J-15, the Chinese pilot felt the vibration of the air. His headset, music, was filled with the American warning. He heard the words clearly. He understood them, but his music orders were absolute. He was to test the reaction time of the American 7th Fleet. He was to see how far the Americans would let him go before they committed to a kill. The pilot adjusted his oxygen mask. His heart rate was 140 beats per minute. He saw the gray mass of the carrier through his canopy. It looked like a steel mountain rising out of the sea. He saw the white wakes of the escorting destroyers. They were turning hard to bring their missile launchers to bear. 3 seconds to intercept, the pilot whispered to himself in Mandarin. He was not suicidal. He was a professional. He knew exactly where the line was. He just did not know if the Americans had the same map. On the bridge of the Carl Vinson, the captain gripped the rail. He is aimed for the bridge. He is going to hit us. Violence is locked. Music, the weapons tech shouted, requesting permission to engage. Target is at 1,500 m. Target is at 1,200 musicum. The admiral spoke for the first time. His voice was a low growl that cut through the panic. Wait, he has not opened his weapons bay. He is clean. Hold fire. The sailors in the room held their breath. Many closed their eyes. The sound of the approaching jet was now a physical force. It felt like the air was being sucked music out of the room. The glass in the bridge windows began to rattle. Then the pilot of the J-15 moved his hand. It was a movement of only 2 inches. The nose of the fighter pitched up. The pilot felt the massive weight of 6 G-forces crush him into his seat. His vision began to tunnel. The horizon disappeared and was replaced by the gray, music, hull of the ship. He was less than 300 m from the steel plating of the flight deck. 8:51 in the morning. The Philippine Sea. The J-15 did not retreat. After its violent pull-up over the flight deck of the Carl Vinson, the fighter hung in the thin air at 15,000 feet. Music. It rolled inverted, looking back down at the carrier like a hawk, watching its prey. This was no longer a single pass. This was a sustained challenge. 5 miles to the east, the escorting music destroyer USS Kidd moved to intercept. The ship was an Arleigh Burke-class vessel designed for exactly this kind of high-stakes air defense. On its bridge, the atmosphere was clinical and cold. Bridge combat. The voice came over the internal system. We have a solid track on the J-15. Phased array radar is in high-priority search. We are painting him with fire control radar now. The commander of the Kidd stood by the glass. Maintain the lock. Do not illuminate him with the landing system. We want him to know we are watching, but we do not want to give him an excuse to fire. This was the delicate balance of the rules of engagement. In the United States Navy, the right of self-defense is absolute, but the definition of hostile intent is a gray area that costs lives. If the Chinese pilot turned his nose toward the ship again, it could be interpreted as a hostile act. If he moved his thumb toward his weapon's release, it was a death sentence. Inside the J-15, the pilot felt the weight of the American technology. His cockpit was a symphony of warnings. The steady hum of a search radar had changed to the aggressive, high-pitched warble of a fire control lock. The Americans were telling him that they had a missile ready to launch. They were telling him that he was 1 second away from becoming a fireball over the Pacific. The pilot ignored the warnings. He checked music his fuel state. He had 40 minutes of loiter time remaining. He looked at his wingman on the radar. Eagle 2. This is Eagle 1, he said into his mask. The Americans are agitated. Maintain your orbit at 20,000 feet. Do not descend unless I give the command. Music, copy, Eagle 1. A younger voice replied. The American Combat Information Center picked up the second contact immediately. Sir, new contact bearing 330. High music altitude, high speed. It is a second J-15. The admiral on the Vinson looked at the tactical music display. The situation was multiplying. 1 fighter was a stunt. 2 fighters was a formation. A formation was a tactical unit. They are setting up a bracket, the admiral said quietly. 1 stays high to provide cover. One stays low to keep us distracted. They are practicing a strike profile on a carrier group in real time. The admiral picked up the secure line to 7th Fleet headquarters in Japan. He needed to know if this was a localized event or if the entire South China Sea was about to erupt. "This is Vincent," the admiral said. "We have multiple hostile tracks. We are at general quarters. We are maintaining a defensive posture, but the window for restraint is closing, requesting immediate status of the Chinese surface fleet." The response from Japan was music, not what he expected. "Vincent, this is 7th Fleet. We are seeing massive movement from Hainan Island. It is not just the fighters. Their destroyers are weighing anchor. Their submarines have gone silent. Music, you are in the middle of a massive exercise that we were not notified about." On the flight deck of the Vincent, the order was given to clear the deck. The routine maintenance stopped. The sailors in the colorful jerseys scrambled for the catwalks. The massive steam catapults, music, hissed as they were brought to full pressure. Two F-35 Lightning fighters were moved into position. The American pilots climbed into their cockpits. They did not talk. They did not joke. They checked their flight controls and waited for the signal to launch. They were the shield. High above the first J-15 began a slow, deliberate spiral. He was descending again. He was not aiming for the bridge this time. He was aiming for the catapults. He was going to prevent the Americans from launching their own aircraft. The distance was closing. The tension was no longer a feeling. Music, it was a physical weight that pressed down on every soul in the strike group. The J-15 banked hard. The sun glinted off the missiles hanging from its wings. 8:54 in the morning. The inner defensive zone of the USS Carl Vinson. The J-15 fighter banked into a hard left turn. It was now less than 4 miles from the carrier. Its nose was pointed, music directly at the bow. This was where the catapults were located. If the pilot crashed here, he would not just kill himself. He would the ability of the United States to launch a counterattack. The flight deck was a crowded and vulnerable target. Millions of dollars of aircraft and hundreds of personnel were exposed. Inside the Combat Information Center, a 21-year-old petty officer sat at the weapons console. Her hand was shaking. She had been in the Navy for 2 years. She had practiced this scenario 1,000 times in a simulator. But in the simulator, the screen did not vibrate with the roar of a real engine. In the simulator, the lives of 5,000 shipmates were not on her shoulders. System is in point defense mode. "Music," she reported. Her voice was thin. "The phalanx is tracking. It is following the targets. Music knows. If he crosses the 300-meter line, the system will fire automatically." The tactical action officer stood behind her. He placed a hand on the back of her chair. It was a gesture of grounding. "Stay on the trigger, petty officer. Do not override the auto-engagement unless I tell you we are within the final layer." The phalanx close-in weapon system was a white dome-shaped unit located on the side of the ship. To the sailors, it looked like a small robot. To an approaching pilot, it was a music grinder. It was capable of firing 4,500. The system could fire thousands of tungsten rounds every minute, enough to create a solid wall of metal no aircraft could survive. The barrels were already spinning. A low mechanical whine echoed through the thick steel of the carrier point 2 miles away. The Chinese pilot felt the change instantly. The air grew heavy. His cockpit displays flickered violently as American electronic warfare systems tried to blind his radar. Without hesitation, he switched to manual control. He didn't need instruments to find something as massive as an aircraft carrier. Eagle One to control. American defenses are active. Multiple high-energy locks detected. They're ready to fire. "Maintain course," came the reply. "Do not break. We need their exact response time." He swallowed. He was trained for this, but he was also a father. For a brief second, he saw his daughter's face, then forced the thought away and pushed the throttle forward. The jets surged. "Target accelerating," the American operator shouted. "Range 1,000 meters. 900, 800. On the flight deck, F-35 pilots sat trapped on the catapults, completely exposed. "Vincent Bridge, this is Lightning 11. Request immediate launch or egress." "Negative," The captain replied coldly. Hold position. The incoming jet was no longer a distant speck. It was a monster tearing through the sky, 500 meters. 400, the petty officer whispered. The defense system reached its final logic gate. Safety locks disengaged. The gun spun to full speed. Then, something unexpected. The Chinese pilot saw a lone sailor standing still on the deck. Not running, just watching him, holding a camera. For a split second, doubt hit him. This didn't feel like word. It felt like a stage point 300 meters on the bridge. The admiral stood frozen, eyes locked on the display. Weapons release probability at 80%. For seconds, to auto-fire. He didn't answer that. He just watched point 250 meters. Inside the jet, the pilot locked onto his aim point. He saw the spinning barrels of the defense gun. He knew this was the edge. Command. I am committed. Braking now. 200 meters. The roar turned into a physical air itself collapsing under pressure. 50 meters. The pilot and the admiral saw each other. 1 heartbeat. 1 decision. The system fired its final signal, and the admiral slammed the override. Silence. The gun stopped at a fraction of a second later. The jet screamed past the carrier at near point-blank range. So close the heat of its engines washed across the deck. Then the pilot pulled. Hard. The aircraft leaped upward under crushing G-forces, climbing violently into the sky. His vision faded to black, then slowly returned. Behind him, the carrier shrank into the ocean. He had survived on the ship. No one spoke. The petty officer stared at her screen, trembling, haunted by the rounds that were never fired. He's gone, the captain whispered, but the admiral wasn't looking at the empty sky on his display. New signals were appearing. The crisis wasn't over. IT was just beginning.